But I would like to mention that it's super cool that your dad listens to this and then tears us apart.
Yeah, he does. It's so
Not
funny.
tears us apart, but he will correct us on stuff, which is great. Are there any? I don't think we have any corrections from the last episode because nobody watched that movie. So
yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head. Any glaring issues that we had. So I'm sure if we made mistakes, we'll find out eventually. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Watch No Evil. This is Matt.
And this is Zach.
And today we're going to be hitting on the 1999 film Sleepy Hollow. This film is a little bit different than ones that we've done in the past, just because it's a little less about the conventional horror stereotypes that we've talked about in previous episodes, as well as episodes that we're planning for the future. And I think that one of the things that I like about this movie is that it's really clear that Tim Burton is paying homage to a lot of those old school horror movies, like the Universal monster films. Did you get that feeling at all when you were watching it?
Well, as we've discussed before, I have not seen a lot of like the more conventional horror movies, like the ones that you're mentioning here. So I actually didn't get that much. I mean, like I did get this kind of like overall gothic feel from it. I mean, I guess I've seen Psycho and like some of the Hitchcock movies, and I guess I did get kind of that vibe.
Right. And I mean, this movie is really interesting because it does employ the use of jump scares, which are a staple for horror movies. And I think a lot of movies use it as a crutch to appear scarier because sudden scare is going to get our heart rate going faster and faster. And I think with a lot of contemporary horror movies, they try to use the jump scares to trick people into thinking that it's like a scary movie. And in doing so, they sort of remove a lot of the good storytelling aspects. And the nature of this film being an adaptation of the book, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, it doesn't have to employ a lot of those jump scare elements. And so I think that it's not as conventionally scary because we're not seeing as many, frightening sudden images pop up, but rather it's about setting a horrific or thriller-based ambiance, which is really important.
Yeah, I would definitely, I think I would classify this as more of a thriller than a horror, just because it's like it blends genres a little bit more. Like it's part almost like murder mystery, but also has those horror elements because it is kind of edging on being a slasher movie. And it does have elements. It's got humorous elements. So I feel like thriller tends to be more of a synthesis of genres more so than horror. And this even contains some action sequences too.
I would agree with that. It feels a little bit more Cabin in the Woods in spirit, where there is a clear blending of all the different ideas. And a lot of that comes from a really strong and well-pronounced aesthetic, which everybody knows Tim Burton for. And I think a gothic setting, it fits really well with that aesthetic naturally.
Tim Burton actually said that he made this film with the inspiration of the gothic horror films of Mario Bava and the Hammer Film Productions. So he actually took a lot of inspiration from those movies, which kind of explains that kind of paying homage to those movies. I have not seen any Mario Bava movies, I should say.
There's an interesting crossover with this movie and the Hammer horror franchise, and that's Christopher Lee. Mm-hmm. Christopher Lee was in the Hammer Dracula movies.
Yeah, and he was also in Mario Bava's, there's like some Hercules movie. So yeah, he's kind of been all over this. And also Michael Gow, he's the one who played the notary, was also, I guess, in some of these Hammer films.
Yeah, I mean, it really was based in that time period of English cinematography and filmmaking where they were basically updating what was the Universal monster style. So they really brought about an increase in gore and in violence and in a lot of the other sort of horror elements that we think of as being staples of the genre today. And they were taking classic stories and just going a little further with them, exaggerating them.
Speaking of Bava, he had a lot of these movies that had this like basic formula of there's this skeptical investigator who puts a lot of his faith into science and reason, as we see Ichabod Crane do. And then he is tasked with going to a town plagued by a murderous ghost. This is another general Bava device, I guess. And then he questions his skepticism about the supernatural because he has this experience where he sees the Headless Horseman. He's no doubt headless. He's not just someone committing murder. There's obviously some supernatural going on here.
I think that there's an interesting thing to be said in that detective that is faced with his own skepticism. And another, I guess, element of comedic irony in it is that Ichabod Crane goes to Sleepy Hollow. People are skeptical of him and the trickery that he is doing. And by trickery, I mean the scientific investigation that he's doing. So they're sort of skeptical of him and his methods as much as he is skeptical of the supernatural, which they all believe without hesitation. So there's this mutual skepticism going on that they both sort of resolve at the end of the movie, because both his scientific methods are deemed reliable, and it's clear that the supernatural elements of the film are true as well. And I think that ties into what he's doing with the birdcage, where he's flipping the birdcage, where on one side it's a cardinal and on the other it's the cage. And when they're spinning fast, the oscillation creates the trick that the bird is in the cage. And so it's sort of like two sides of the skeptical coin. Both really do exist. Combined together, they just create a new image.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, like the two sides of the coin kind of idea. Is when he first presents the optical illusion to Katrina, just to be like, hey, look at this cool trick. And she's like, yeah, it's magic or something. And then he says, truth is not always appearance. So that kind of fits in with your interpretation of, it's just because there isn't a scientific explanation to it, that would be the truth half, but appearance would be there's a supernatural. So kind of they don't always equate, I guess, is the point there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this movie is sort of about them letting go of the skeptical nature on both sides. I think, though, that it is sort of not exactly the best in terms of pacing, that resolution of that skepticism, especially because after the horseman kills the magistrate in front of Ichabod Crane, we switch to Ichabod Crane in his bed saying there was a horseman and he was headless and it's all real. And Michael Gambon's just like, yeah, we all told you. Everyone told you. And then it's like 2 minutes later, he emerges from his bedroom and he's like, I have faced my fears and I have come out the other side. And now we're going to continue moving on. I feel like in a different movie that might have been paced better, but because of the nature of the story, it makes it difficult to just be able to give Ichabod the type of personality that would be able to overcome that fear, especially because before that he hadn't been proven to the audience.
I wonder if it was really originally written that way or if that's a Johnny Depp move right there. Because when he's in the bed and he's like freaking out, like, oh, the horseman's real. He really was headless, and he's got the blanket like pulled in front of him. It's just very Johnny Depp, and then to have that turnaround, that sudden like shift in confidence is also very Johnny Depp.
Yeah,
I don't think anyone else could have pulled that off.
I agree. It's just, and of course, it could be another element of the comedic irony in this movie. And especially because so much of this movie is reliant on the humor. This movie is really that genre-bending kind of film because there are a lot of comedic elements. And then a lot of the horror elements are very much grotesque in essence. The way that they handle blood splatter in the movie and the way that things are designed. It's a little bit more atmospheric.
The fog.
Yeah, the fog, the use of the fog, which I think does harken back to the 1950s, 1940s classic horror movie aesthetic.
I mean, going back to the humor thing, you mentioned the magistrate getting beheaded and killed in front of Ichabod, and that's when he has that sudden turn of, oh, there is this supernatural element. That death scene was quite humorous, I thought. He's got his, what is it called? That little pendant thing.
He's got the Ankh.
The Ankh, that's what it is, right. So he's got the Ankh, and Ichabod goes, hey, what's this about? And he said, it protects me from the horsemen. And then pretty immediately, the horseman appears. And it's pretty clear that he's going after the magistrate and not Ichabod. So the magistrate starts running away. And then right before he gets his head chopped off, he says, "Oh my God." And I thought that was a great line because he's supposed to be this religious figure. And I don't know if it's like this call out to God. It did not seem that way, but it was like this one last, hey, let's pull religion into this kind of idea. And then the way his head spins on top of his body before it rolls, and then it lands between Ichabod's legs, which I don't know how we want to read into that, but you can do what you want there, I guess. It was just very humorous the way he dies.
Yeah, it is really interesting too, because you don't necessarily consider the Ankh a Western religious symbol. You know what I mean? I would normally associate the Ankh with, Egyptian symbol of life and of protection. And I feel like that plays a little bit more into almost the witchcraft element of it. This would have taken place during like the Second Awakening, Protestant religious culture, where witchcraft would have been super divisive, or the idea of witchcraft. And we see that played out in the way that Ichabod's mother is put to death. The witchcraft element to it with that, I think, is a really interesting parallel too, because it comes up several times where they're in direct juxtaposition. And I think probably the most important direct juxtaposition is when Katrina draws the pentagram of protection for a loved one while inside the church.
They kind of make a big deal of Katrina practicing, what does he say, white magic or white witchcraft?
White magic.
Right, white magic, as opposed to Lady Van Tassel and her sister, who are obviously doing the opposite of white magic.
I think about this movie and the way that witchcraft is sort of handled in these Gothic style films, because in this one, it's really sort of hard to get a read on how people feel about it, how the actual characters react towards witchcraft. Obviously, Ichabod's totally cool with it, and he's going to let Katrina get away with the murders. So that's issue one.
Well, I think that's only because he liked her.
Right. So there's a romance subplot too. Add that to the genre list. But also that it shows his mother as being this very pure and innocent and beautiful soul. And the only times where we see really vibrant color and light in the movie is scenes with her in it. And then it shows the church as being sort of this false protection, because the church is responsible for his mother's death. It is in fact a facade behind which is these instruments of torture, one of which Ichabod pricks his hands on, and where his mother is killed. And then later on, when Katrina is drawing the circle, the church is supposed to be this manifestation of sanctuary that no harm can befall those inside. And we get 3 deaths of main characters inside that church too. So there's sort of a commentary on, I would say, religion and like religious persecution.
Right. When they're all in the church, I immediately said there is so many guns in the church. It's very, very American. It's very, very soon after America's birth.
Yeah.
And
it's their well-armed religious militia.
Right. And I think there's a statement being made there for sure. It's this place of protection, yet they bring all these guns and weapons inside. And who is it? Someone literally beats someone else to death with the cross.
Yeah. Okay. So Reverend Steenwick kills the doctor with the cross. And think about for a second how quick everyone inside the church, including the reverend of the church, are to basically demolish the inside, totally desecrate the building. He breaks a cross off to bludgeon another man to death with it. Everyone else that's inside, they're pushing pews and they're breaking windows, and they are so quick to just absolutely demolish their, sanctuary. And it's supposed to be this like beacon of safety that the Headless Horseman can't cross into, but it's portrayed more or less as like a wartime shelter, and one that's ineffectual at most. So I think that it's really interesting that there is in this movie such a sharp contrast between the portrayal of witchcraft, which in the film is mostly used for good. Obviously, the Headless Horseman being controlled to kill people is the negative side, but Katrina, Ichabod's mother, even the other witch sister who uses her power to warn Ichabod, are sort of positive portrayals. And then all of the religious figures in the film are portrayed really negatively.
Right. And bring it back to the church scene. After the doctor is about to reveal part of the whole conspiracy to Baltus Van Tassel. And then the Reverend hits him over the head with the cross to get him to stop. And then Baltus immediately shoots the Reverend. And then it seems like all the townspeople then in the church, right after he kills the Reverend, they all turn on Baltus. And they all seem kind of like violent towards him. And he goes like, well, now hold on. And he goes up the stairs. And then that's when he gets impaled by the Headless Horseman. So it's just kind of funny. Like immediately after the Reverend is dead, they all kind of lose their sense of religious
decorum.
Obligation. Yeah, I guess decorum is better. You think in a movie that has this vengeful spirit and they do believe he's coming from hell and that his sword is like forged with hellfire and all this stuff, this demonic kind of presence, and yet that's really the only scene where they mention or even there's the presence of religion. And it seems like they have, as a town, they've kind of lost faith in religion being like this thing that can help them with this issue.
It makes me think about the greater symbolism of the film as a whole, specifically because of exactly what you said with his optical illusion, that truth is not always appearance, and both the witchcraft element appears different than what it truthfully is, and it's later revealed at the end of the movie, the pink circle underneath of his bed. He's found that, but when he's leaving town, thinking that Katrina is responsible for the actual Headless Horseman, he's flipping the optical illusion in his hands, and then it becomes a scene where he later looks at the book and he sees the pentagram, and it says spells of protections for a loved one. So it's like it's trying to connect you that what you see is not what is happening. And I think that the fact that it's that circle enclosed pentagram, it's supposed to be connected then to his optical illusion trick. In that, the church, again, it's not what it appears. The truth of the matter is that it's not a sanctuary for them in this instance. It's in fact the opposite. It clusters them all together in an easily killable manner.
Right. Yeah. They do a great job flipping the script on the viewer without you really noticing right away. Like usually you think witchcraft bad, religion good in these types of movies, and they've done the opposite.
Yeah, and I would say if you watch this movie for the first time, it really is impossible to get a read on who the villain truly is.
Right, and that's a great mystery. Like it's almost like a murder mystery, and the way that it's written out in paste. There's these scenes where Ichabod is trying to figure it out for himself, while it's like those natural moments in the movie where the viewer would also be trying to figure out, okay, now there's this moment to breathe in the plot. Who could it be? And I think that they do such a good job with that, like leading you through the murder mystery.
And having Lady Van Tassel be the ultimate villain in the end, it's sort of funny to have her be the one because there's very little ever suggested evidence for it being her. But it's sort of that quintessential last minute reveal. But in that, and I would like to hear your thoughts on this. Thinking of it as a first time viewer, how likely were you to believe that Katrina was at all responsible?
Oh, I didn't think it was her at all. Even when he pretty much deduced all the evidence points to Katrina being the one. Just from her overall demeanor, it didn't seem like she had the motivation to murder all these people, or I guess have them murdered. And what I noticed it's interesting about Lady Van Tassel is that she's supposed to be dead at that point. Mm-hmm. Baltus comes to the church and he says to Katrina, your stepmother is dead. And they do have this kind of lead into that where the head horseman rides up to their house and she's out front doing something in the garden or something, and he like raises his sword up in front of her, but they don't show him beheading her, and she's the only one that they don't show that because it's fake. So you don't really I didn't even think about that until after the fact, but it is kind of a dead giveaway that she's not actually dead.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's a lot that goes on with that particular side of the film. It's not one to shy away from showing you the kill. The only other one that it doesn't show in the film directly, I believe, is the child of the midwife, and that's obviously for reasons of sensibility and not showing that on camera.
Right. Well, you know what? I did see that Tim Burton, I guess, with some of the writers, he said, why it bothers me that children are always spared in these types of movies. Why is that true? So he kind of made a point of having some child murder in this movie.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. And the reason that I don't agree with it too is because they invent the characters specifically for that scene to happen. Because from what we had seen of the movie up to then, we knew that the midwife was a person, and we knew that her husband was a person. And it's later revealed that the reason that the midwife and the husband of the midwife were killed in the first place is because they heard the rumor about the affair and the child, and they were connected to Lady Von Tassel in that way. But then they invented this child to be another element of horror. It's like when they kill the dog in the horror movie. It doesn't really add to the plot, but it ups the discomfortingness of it.
Right, and I think that the whole family, that the Killians, I think that was just it's filler. They were like, we need more death in this little town. We need more characters to then slaughter off during this plot. So I think it was just another thing to fill time with. And that was one of the action sequences where Killian actually does fight back, and this is when the horseman's like wielding the dual axes. It's kind of this.
Yeah, and then Brahm fights him and also dies.
Yeah, it was something to just drive forward.
It actually does set up the way in which Ichabod is injured, and then allows for the, quintessential detective recovery period where then Katrina was able to draw the seal of protection underneath of his bed, because it's not until after he awakes from that he sees it. I think that it's a good way of facilitating that to happen, to have him sort of go through that fever dream recollection, because it also allows us to then see what actually happened to his mother, because it gives us another dream sequence. It reminds me a lot, actually, of the Sherlock Holmes movie.
Right, yeah, it does have a similar feel to it. Speaking of the gothic elements, once again, there was a whole lot of red, white, and black, which is also very Tim Burton to do, but there's an astounding amount of those three colors. And it seemed like it was almost flipping the script here, whereas you think of white as being this more pure and good kind of color, and black maybe being a little more neutral, but then red, as we've discussed in previous episodes, red is usually, that's the color of the devil, and it's bad. It's this kind of off-putting, violent color. And it seems like a lot of the good things in this movie, a lot of the cardinals are red, and that's considered to be this symbol of good throughout the movie.
I agree with what you're saying. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. I think it's sort of a symbol of truth, because he talks about truth is not always appearance with the optical illusion. And then when he's at the tree and he's hacking into the tree and the blood is coming out, that is him finding the truth in the situation and realizing that the tree is a portal to hell, and that everything going on with the Headless Horseman is real. I think the same thing is even said when he's doing the autopsy on the widow who was with child, and it has the blood splurt out, and it's supposed to be this comedic moment, but it's also when he emerges from that and he's covered in red, he reveals the truth about her situation to everyone in the town. It translates, for me at least, to this is everything. This is real. Even serving as a reminder for him when he is in the dream world and he goes into that back torture room of the church and he pricks his hand, and then he looks at his hand and it's bleeding. That was a real event. And then when he wakes up from it, his hand is still slightly bleeding, as if the wounds had been renewed.
I like that interpretation that the red is truth, because also in the dream sequences when he goes into that room with all the torture devices, that the door to that room is bright red. So that makes sense that he's kind of figuring out things in the dream. And then also Katrina's room is very red inside. I don't remember when it was in the plot, but she got injured or something, and he's like checking up on her in her room, and there's just all this red. And I wonder, because Katrina's character has this kind of almost omniscience to her. Like she's very calm the whole time, and she seems to know, like, you get this impression that she knows more than Ichabod, even though Ichabod's the one investigating everything. That's because she knows the truth, or because they try to frame her for the purpose of the plot.
I don't know if it's necessarily that she knows the truth or that she knows more than Ichabod, but I agree. It paints her in that knowledgeable or wise light, saying that she is able to look upon the things around her through an objective lens. And I think that there are moments in the film where we're supposed to understand Ichabod to be this objective, scientific, reasonable character, but ultimately he lacks a lot of knowledge about the town, about the legend of Sleepy Hollow, about the Headless Horseman, and about life in general. And I think that that's where Katrina really comes in, and she's the streetwise. She's the one with the knowledge about the way life truly is, seeing it really objectively, because Ichabod is obviously blinded by his own scientific intention and bias.
Right. I mean, Ichabod, what Ichabod brings to the table is basically just deductive reasoning.
and even then, he's still trying to fit what is happening into his own framework. He doesn't let things just sort of happen and pass him by. He is actively trying to shape it to his design. So I agree. I think that Katrina is really more that truthful embodiment.
Right. So I have a question. This just occurred to me.
Mm-hmm.
So Lady Van Tassel is the one in charge of who the Headless Horseman kills. She has his skull, so then she is in control of him as a spirit. And so she has all these people killed so that she gets the Van Garrett inheritance and has her vengeance on those people that wronged her family all those years ago. So this guy, Ichabod, comes to town to investigate, and as time goes on, gets closer and closer to figuring you out. Why doesn't she just have him killed before then going about business as usual, trying to get her inheritance? Like, how are those... How are those deaths more pressing than the guy who's finding stuff out about her?
That's a good question. And actually, I think it's because she has Ichabod as a pawn, because I believe that she knows that he thinks that it's Katrina. And I think that she knows that he doesn't suspect her, actually.
Well, and I guess when he does start suspecting her, that's when she's off in the woods with, who was it again?
The Reverend Steenwick.
And then the next morning, she makes a point to then show her hand cut to Ichabod. And that's kind of like when they have the body later of Lady Van Tassel, that's kind of the identifying mark, is that she has this cut on her hand. So it's almost like she staged that instead of just having him killed, which still is baffling to me. Why wouldn't you just do that?
But I think that was another instance where that makes Reverend Steenwick look bad. And I think that it's not until Balthus Van Tassel comes in and Ichabod deliberately backs up her story about the kitchen knife and about how, and doesn't say anything, that she kind of has him in the spider web. He's not going to reveal anything. And ultimately, whatever he does come up with, it's going to be directed towards Balthus, or it's going to be directed towards Steenwick instead of her, because she was just a nurse beforehand. As far as he knows, she's totally innocent.
Right, but my point is, cover your bases. just be safe.
Right. But let's think about it. It seems like she also has to have like articles of their clothing to be able to perform the ritual. For example, she needs Katrina's hair. So we don't know, I guess, the bounds of the paranormal requirements. Maybe there's something about Ichabod that doesn't allow him to be directly hunted by the Headless Horseman.
Or maybe it was that book of witchcraft that Katrina gave him. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, do we ever really see Lady Van Tassel interact with Ichabod before that scene?
There's where it's right after when he's hurt by the horseman, with the scene with Brom dying, he gets hurt and then he wakes up in bed, and Lady Van Tassel is like nursing him back to health, and he goes, "Oh, like what happened with your housemates or whatever that normally would be doing this job?" And she said they all left because they're afraid of the horsemen. So there is just that moment before.
And actually, that would have been a good time to have taken something of his that could be used. Yeah, I mean, this movie's not without its faults.
Well, and speaking of its faults, let's talk about the horsemen.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I don't think that they didn't like do the horsemen poorly. I think, in fact, the way that they did the horsemen in this like kind of vaguely campy manner was purely intentional. And so the horseman is supposed to be a Hessian, right? So for those listening who don't know, a Hessian is or was a German mercenary who served with the British Army in the Revolutionary War. So he's this, soldier for hire who was fighting American soldiers, and it would be the American soldiers that then killed him with his own sword.
Yeah, and for that, he wants to take his revenge on the Americans in this little Dutch town.
Right, and it's like this classic vengeful spirit trope of, he lost his head, so now he's collecting the heads of his victims in death. So it's and the one kind of neat thing about the Horseman is that detail of the neck wounds being cauterized, and I think it's Baltus says that it's from the hellfire that is like on his sword. So I thought that was kind of a neat touch of, okay, so maybe there is some supernatural, unless this guy's got a lightsaber or something.
I would agree that I don't necessarily think that he was the best iteration of the Horseman that they could have done, but he definitely was an interesting figure in the way that he was portrayed in the film as this agent of evil that was being controlled by Lady Van Tassel, which is a very interesting adaptation from the original story. I have a question for you then. Where do we rank the Headless Horseman in sort of the compendium of villainry? Do we consider him to be the villain of the movie?
So you're asking whether it's the Horseman or if it's Lady Van Tassel?
Yeah.
I think it's both.
You think
She's
it's both?
using him. I mean, he's from the flashback when they're kind of telling that origin story of the Horseman. He does not look well adjusted. He looks like he very much enjoys murdering people. And I think they straight up say that, right?
Yeah, he was good at his job.
He was like this really skilled assassin, but he also, what was it? He just enjoyed killing, I think is what they said. And so I think he truly is the villain. There's no good person just likes killing.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the creation of a monster, and so I wanted to sort of talk about that idea of creating a monster in horror movie films, and sort of how this one fits into it. Because I would say that this isn't the first movie where there has been a monster or creature or killer that has been under the control of someone else who is pulling all of the strings. And I found this particular instance, it sort of makes the Horseman feel less scary to me, knowing that he is being controlled by Lady Van Tassel. And I was wondering if you felt the same way, that potentially part of what multiple viewings of this movie do is that they remove the audience from feeling at all afraid of the Horseman. And the reason let me clarify, the reason I'm asking is because when I saw it the first time, I would say, yeah, I was probably scared of the Headless Horseman. And I would say that in even the cartoon versions of this that I've seen, when it's the first time, you're a little bit more afraid of the Horseman. But then coming back to this movie so many years later and already knowing that it's Lady Van Tassel that's controlling it, I feel removed from the Horseman because I don't know Lady Van Tassel and I've never interacted, and therefore because I've never interacted with her, I don't have to fear the Horseman. Do you feel that at all?
I would agree there, because especially since she is a mortal person with, questionable conscience, but she has a conscience, and as opposed to just this vengeful spirit just wrecking this town with, willy-nilly, no regard for any rules or anything. And then when it's revealed that she's the one pulling the strings on him, and it's revealed that there is this method behind the killings, then it does become less scary. It's this whole thing of okay, well then these certain people might be okay, like Ichabod and Katrina might be okay because these are the main characters that we're supposed to be attached to.
Yeah.
So it does make it less scary.
I think that it makes it less scary. And as far as this film being a horror film, it is classified as a horror film, and I think that there are quintessential horror elements to it. The monster is not the thing that I am really afraid of in this movie. The Headless Horseman's not who I'm waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat having dreamt about, because having the knowledge that he's being controlled by Lady Van Tassel sort of takes away that element for me. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I think that it's a level of removal.
Right. I mean, what creates that level of removal, I think, is as soon as you take this being who seems to have no regard for the rules of society, and so suddenly it's revealed that there is a rule. Even when you give it one rule that it follows, it becomes less scary, because you could say, all right, this is how I avoid angering this demon and getting killed, or this ghost or whatever he is. There's a way around it. Suddenly there's a logical not explanation, but there's a logical solution.
Yeah, I think that we talked about other movies that we want to do for this, and actually it makes me think of The Strangers. And the reason that, for me, The Strangers is such an intensely terrifying movie all culminates with when the lead actress in that movie says, "Why are you doing this to us?" And one of the strangers responds with, "Because you were home." That, to me, is horrifying, that there is a creature that is, or that there is a villain that is killing without regard and without sort of rule, but just because. And I think if you're watching Sleepy Hollow for the first time and you see the Headless Horseman, and the Headless Horseman's motivation is taking revenge on this Dutch New England town, that feels a lot scarier. That feels a lot more personal, because we're viewing the movie and we're like, oh, I don't live in this town, but you instead become a part of the everyone in this town. There's a lot more sense of, I guess, community in thought. And then once you boil it down to, oh, everybody else in this town is fine, it's just these select people who have to worry, it becomes less communal and more individualistic.
Right. And I think that, so we have this theme or idea of truth in this movie. And I think that in a horror movie, what creates the horror, or I guess the potency of the horror, is this ratio of truth to fear. And the more truth you have, the less fear you have. Right, and vice versa. So in this movie, as the plot goes on, if I was to graph this out, you would see the truth going up, and you would see the fear going down. That's why towards the end of the movie, they have these intense action sequences to give you more of a thrill, to simulate fear, and I guess fear for their lives instead of fear of the horsemen. And that's, and you mentioned The Strangers. That's there in that movie. You do kind of get this sense of truth going up as the plot goes down, but then that line happens that you mentioned of "because you were home," and then the sense of truth just goes negative, and fear goes all the way up, and you go, "Wow, they're just." To quote, what is it, The Dark Knight or whatever, you just want to see the world burn.
Yeah.
That's what's scariest.
Yeah, and I think that an element of modern horror that happens, and if you treat this like a classic horror film, there is that element of desensitization that we've had as people who have grown up with terrifying movies. I mean, we talked about The Thing, which was before our time. I mean, if you look at Alien, if you look at Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and Reanimator, all of these things that sort of happened before us, and by us, I mean Zach and I, there's a difference because we have grown up with this type of horror versus the 1940s, 1950s aesthetic of horror movies, which was more atmospheric and more about character creation, because to be honest, Frankenstein never did anything that I would consider woefully scary. Dracula never did anything in those movies that, made me nervous or would scare me, or the Wolfman even. And I would go so far as to say a lot of the William Castle movies wouldn't have really given me reason for for terror or for pause or for fear. And if you think about this movie, if you took this movie and you enhanced the black and white of it, you just made it pure black and white, you put it back in that time period, I think this movie would be way scary.
I feel like Tim Burton very much intended for this film to be retrospective almost. It's kind of bringing these modern elements into a classic tale in this old setting.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so clear who he's referencing and who he wants you to know that he knows. I mean, I mentioned it offhand, but the end of the movie where they have the entire sort of climactic moment in the windmill is such an homage to how they kill, or rather, they attempt to kill Frankenstein in the original Frankenstein movies for Universal. And I think that windmill image is so often replicated in Tim Burton films. And in fact, my favorite iteration of it is probably when it happens in Frankenweenie. Which at times I think is more scary than this movie is. And it's a cartoon. But they do it again there, and I mean it's down to like every element of that windmill that you're viewing, the how tattered it is and how decayed it is. It all just looks like the quintessential Frankenstein windmill.
That scene does feel like it's almost from a different movie. It feels a little out of place. I mean, it's not so much in setting, but in pacing. It feels like a different movie. I don't know how else to put it.
It's really clear where he's getting a lot of his references. And I think that's why it fits so much better into that horror aesthetic, which is an important part of horror movie history.
But I mentioned Mario Bava earlier. There's also when Ichabod's in his dream and he sees his mother in the Iron Maiden torture device. That concept and that image is almost shot for shot from one of Bava's movies, Black Sunday.
Yeah. I know about that.
And that one actually, Tim Burton he had wanted to remake that movie, but I guess it never went through. I guess he exercised his ability to imitate it here.
Let's talk about the score of this movie, Zach.
All right.
What did you think about it?
I loved it because I love anything that he does. He's just so good at matching what's going on screen.
The score of this movie is, of course, by longtime collaborator Tim Burton, Danny Elfman.
I think that Danny Elfman does such a good job of orchestrating and writing for what is going on screen, just to match. He's just such a good cinematic composer.
Yeah, and he's very thematic in everything that he does. It's always about adaptations and development of themes, and I think that in this movie in particular, it plays into that same sort of technique of using themes and twisting and turning them so that they have different meanings. For example, his love theme for Katrina and Ichabod, which is in essence very similar to the overall Horseman theme, like the horror theme. And actually, when Lady Van Tassel and Reverend Steenwick are having an affair, there's that same sort of love theme, but it's been like horribly distorted and made ugly to represent what they're doing. That being said, I think that this is, and I wanted to mention him, this is a development from Christopher Young, who is a film composer who worked on Hellraiser. And Christopher Young was part of the movement that introduced the big gothic score, that like huge orchestra, huge choir sound where everything is almost this like Catholic mass, powerful gothic sound, which began from subverting the traditional electronic score that was becoming really prominent at the time. He used Hellraiser to take it in a new direction, and I think that they really felt the effects of Hellraiser all the way up to this movie.
Yeah, there were a lot of moments where you hear some voice come in, and it does help to create this more unsettling kind of feel. Like, for example, when what's the kid, young Mosbeth and Ichabod are going to see that witch, and they hear her kind of singing to herself, or I guess kind of chanting almost, and it fits so well with the soundtrack that at first I wasn't sure if it was part of the soundtrack or part of what was going on in the movie. But then they seem so freaked out by this. Okay, so it's a sound that's happening in the movie, but it's so integrated.
So I have a question, Zach. You are a competent musician.
Sure.
What would you say is probably the most common quotation in horror movies like this?
Most common quotation?
Yeah, like what are they quoting?
Oh, probably Psycho, like the
ooh.
Oh, I know what you mean. Okay.
Yep. What is it?
I thought you meant quoting of a different horror movie soundtrack. Probably DSE Ray.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I was going to say. So I have to ask, did you hear the DSE Ray in this?
It was being played during the church scene, right?
Of course
Yeah.
it was.
Okay.
I just had to bring it up because it's in everything. It's in like every horror movie. I don't know if it's been in all the ones that we've watched so far, but it was definitely in this one.
I think it was in The Conjuring.
It was, yeah. It's so common, and it's now to the point where whenever I hear the DSC Ray, just mentally my mind shuts down, and I'm just like, okay, cool.
Oh, that's so weird that you mentioned that, because it was stuck in my head earlier today.
I mean, I don't know how it's not stuck in your head constantly. It feels like it's in everything that's ever been written.
It's catchy.
Yeah, and I think that Tim Burton has used it in every movie he's made, and I won't fault Tim Burton for one of those examples, and it's Sweeney Todd, which the DSE Ray that is used in Sweeney Todd is the direct fault of Stephen Sondheim. So I'm not going to fault Tim Burton on that one. He gets a pass for that one. It's Stephen Sondheim who I have beef with. So,
well, I guess wouldn't it more? Do you think that Tim Burton is requesting that DSC Ray be put in, or Danny Elfman's just doing it?
Oh, that's a good question. I would almost bet that it is Elfman.
Really? See, I would have said the opposite. I would think that
Really?
Tim Burton would say, all right, this is where I want that DSE Ray, just because Tim Burton seems to be, well, I guess I don't know too much about how Danny Elfman, how he works.
Yeah, and how much control he exerts over the actual music elements of the film is totally up for debate too. Like I said, I always just think that the DSE Ray, it comes into these movies that have this sort of gothic style out of necessity, because the turnaround for the score creation and the composition is so fast that it's hard to come up with like a good original memorable church melody. And why waste your time on that when you can just throw in an arrangement of the DSE Ray and then really put your energy and effort into the other things, like the love theme in this movie, which is really original and very Elfman. All right, do you have trivia? Do you have questions for me?
All right, so we got some trivia here, and I came up with the traditional pun. So it's called "Ik a bod e without a head." It sounds like Ichabod. Oh, it's so bad. I apologize, but
you
I
tried
thought of it.
So hard for that one.
This again was lots of effort, but. So the horse's name was Gunpowder, right?
Right.
What was the horse actor's name? So here's multiple choice. You got A, Goldeneye, B, Gary, C, Trooper, or D, Bacardi.
I'm going to go with Goldeneye. I think it's Goldeneye.
You're right. You know your horse names. And Johnny Depp actually adopted Goldeneye when he heard that Goldeneye was going to be put down after production.
Oh, that's great.
All right, next question. After being cast as the Headless Horseman, Christopher Walken brought one concern to Tim Burton. What was this concern?
Was it about him having to do the fight choreography without being able to see?
Nope.
Ooh, what was it?
It was actually that he didn't know how to ride a horse. He had never ridden a horse before.
Oh, really?
Being cast as the Headless Horseman, who is most of the time on a horse.
On a horse, yeah.
So they got him some lessons. All right. Well, next one. In the novel, how did the Headless Horseman lose his head?
Oh, it was the cannon blast.
Yep, you got it. Okay. But in the movie, they did get the part about it was during a battle as a result of the Revolutionary War. So yeah, that's all I got. So thank you everyone for tuning into this episode of Watch No Evil. We'll be back next week with yet another episode on yet another horror movie. This is Zach.
And this is Matt.
And we'll catch you on the next one.